Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for coming out today. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and you're getting ready for the upcoming holiday season. So for those of you that have not participated in one of our webinars in the past, again, as Adam mentioned, this is our second this year. We did two last year as well, leading up to our leadership forum, which kicks off in January. But for those that have not participated in one, I'll do a brief introduction to myself and my company. I'm Brad Konik, CEO of Konik. We're a technical talent network. We've been around since 1974. We've placed over 20,000 candidates statewide throughout the Midwest and actually even across the country. But we're definitely focused here in the Midwest area. We've helped thousands of companies find top technical talent, focused almost exclusively in the engineering, manufacturing, and AEC industries. So, our company's core purpose is to positively impact people's lives. And we put these webinars together for that purpose, because we believe that helping our clients, our prospects within our network become better leaders is doing just that, positively impacting their lives. So our presenter today, Adam, as they say, requires no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Adam is a co-founder of Renzo Experience. It's a leadership development and culture consulting firm based in the Midwest. Adam has worked with thousands of leaders to help create clarity and alignment within their organizations. He is a two-time TED Talk speaker, with one of his talks surpassing 6 million views on YouTube and TED.com. So always excited to have him here today. And with that, Adam, I'll pass it over to you.
Brad, thank you so much. I appreciate that immensely. And I chuckle at the needs no introduction. Most people have no idea who I am. So
I know.
It's super kind of you to say that. I do, from time to time, I'll see people out in public or meet someone on a plane and they'll say, "You look really familiar." I'm like, yeah, there's not a million bald guys with glasses walking around. So I just have one of those faces. Anyway, thank you all for being here. I see a lot of new names. I see some familiar names. Thank you all for showing up. And we're going to dig into the content here today about turbulence ahead, what leaders need to know to navigate 2023. And one of the things that Brad didn't mention that I want to make sure and cover is that for the last 20 years or so, I've been a student of human behavior. I've studied psychology, organizational psychology. I've studied how people make decisions, how people function under stress. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, it relates 100% with Brad's description of what Konik exists to do, and that's impact people's lives positively. So know that we're going to spend some time together today, but it would be wrong to assume that the time is not well spent unless you walk away with at least one idea that can make your life better. So if you would just commit to listening for at least one idea that you can apply either to your life personally or professionally that will make your life better in that regard. That is my goal for you and hopefully your goal walking away from the webinar today. Without further ado, I always like to start off with a story. So as it relates to turbulence, I was on a flight. This was probably about 10 years ago, but it was so memorable. I still love telling this story. I was on probably an hour and 20-minute flight on a very small airplane. I was flying with a friend of mine. We happened to be flying on for business purposes. And we were sitting in the very front seats of one of those smallish planes. So when the flight attendant sat down, she would sit down in the jump seat and we were literally knee to knee with her. And we were having this very pleasant conversation with her just about how long was the trip and where was she going next. She was asking us where we were flying to and from and what we were doing when we got there and all of that. And at one point, the phone next to her dinged, right? It boom, did the thing like that, like the pilot was calling. And she picks up the phone and she said, "Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you." And then she hangs the phone back up and proceeded to ratchet herself with the shoulder straps into her seat as tightly as possible. And my friend and I look at each other. He looks at me, I look at him, and we said to her almost in unison, "Anything we should know?" And she said this, "It's nothing." Now, for the next about 2 minutes later, and for the next 10 minutes, we went through the worst turbulence I have ever experienced in my entire life. And I laugh about it now because the woman clearly had some idea in mind. Like, don't tell the passengers what actually is going to happen because they'll all erupt in a panic. But watching her cinch down those shoulder straps would be like you putting moving boxes in one of your direct reports offices, stacking 2 or 3 high, enough to like store all of the things in the office. And then them saying, "What are these for?" And you saying, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing." This is part of what we're going to talk about today, is this idea of turbulence and how do you manage the messaging and the leadership of people who are also experiencing turbulence. Now, you might ask, how do we know if there's turbulence or if it's coming? Clearly, you may or may not be watching the evening news. I tend to watch Mr. Lester Holt. Most evenings, we at least have him on in the background as background noise. And what I often find is that Lester Holt starts out the broadcast by saying good evening, and then spends the next 29 minutes telling you why it's not. Okay. If you pay attention to any of the headlines out there, the headlines are things like Reuters, as Fed warns of turbulence ahead, markets remove their seatbelts. Franklin Templeton Mutual Fund said, quick thoughts, turbulence ahead. Rising risk of a recession. These headlines are in almost every single industry magazine in one way, shape, or form. And I really want to speak to turbulence as it relates to how we deal with it, because one of the things that's happening right now is there's a lot of buildup to what may or may not occur in 2023. And if you read what the prognosticators say, what you could assess from that is there is a high risk of recession in the future, just given some of the economic indicators and what's happening right now internationally. So there's a high percentage chance of a recession happening next year. But we don't know where, we don't know how it will hit. We don't know necessarily the impact on our businesses. And yet there will be a narrative that will be created in the walls of your company that, if not managed, could take over and flood the so-called airwaves in your office with what could be negative, potentially damaging narrative. Again, I'll use that word because I'm going to bring it up later. So Peter Drucker, who was a famous management consultant, was famous for having said this: the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. And if we think about this, if we're concerned about what the turbulence looks like into 2023, maybe what we need are strategies to actually see it ahead of time and avoid it. Or how do we house and couch the issue with our teammates so that we're actually well prepared to get through the turbulence effectively? We're going to talk about all of that here today. And my goal is to give you 4 strategies here in a moment that will walk you through step by step some of the things that you can do with your team. These are concrete takeaways you can use, whether it's with your team, it could be at home, it could be with your children, it could be virtually anywhere. One of the things that we note about pilots is that they see turbulence ahead of time and they attempt to avoid it. So if you've ever been on a flight and you feel yourself diverting, or the pilot may say, we're avoiding some potential weather issues and some turbulence ahead, they're flying around the turbulence. And the way they do that is not by looking back, right? They're not looking at yesterday's flight plan or what last week's weather patterns looked like. They're actually in communication with other pilots who are saying, at this altitude, at this particular wind speed and direction, this was the kind of turbulence we experienced. And then what happens is, as a result, they begin to avoid those turbulent areas for their passengers. So here is the takeaway from pilots, and carrying this metaphor out a little bit. Number one is that as we look ahead to 2023, one of the things that you as leaders need to be doing is being in communication with other folks in similar markets, not necessarily within your company, but certainly within the market, maybe even the industry. And for that matter, maybe it's a completely different group in a variety of subspecialties, but everyone's giving their input on what kind of turbulence is ahead potentially. So what we're doing is, in communicating with other people, we're seeing what may be ahead and then planning on how we avoid that turbulence for ourselves and our departments this year. This might look like masterminding with creatives. Now, here's why I say that. Creatives generally have the gift of vision. They can see things ahead. They can spot patterns and habits and things that may be problematic down the road. So we want to mastermind or network with those kind of people. And as a leader, one of the things that I can't recommend highly enough is finding 2, 3, 4 people that you meet with on a monthly basis and that you spend 20 minutes talking about your own business and another maybe 20 minutes as a group, 20, 30 minutes describing how you might help each other solve problems. Now, fundamentally, this is how the forum operates. And Brad mentioned it at the beginning. I'm going to mention it at the end of today's webinar, but we're really introducing you to some of the content and the theories around the Leaders Forum that is sponsored and put on by Konik. And what we do in the forum at the end is we have peer-to-peer guidance, peer-to-peer coaching, peer-to-peer experience sharing. And the benefit of that is your peers who may be in a different industry or a different role than you have probably had experiences that are going to be helpful to you in dealing and navigating with potential challenges. Let me give you another example of how we use this strategy of seeing and avoiding. I'm about to do a 2-day offsite strategic planning session with a company. And one of the things that each of the 9 executive leadership team members were tasked with was coming up with what are all the headwinds and the tailwinds that they perceive going into 2023. We'll spend about 90 minutes going through headwinds and tailwinds, and then mapping out what might be strategies that we could deploy to avoid some of those headwinds or take advantage of some of the tailwinds. So if you are either doing a strategic planning session, or you've already done it, but that was not part of your planning session, consider taking a 90-minute meeting with some of the executive leadership team and doing this strategic planning exercise. What are headwinds? What are tailwinds? What are some of the pitfalls or turbulent areas that we might need to avoid into 2023? Okay, so leaders need to see ahead, right? What about your team? Your team is going to be caught in some of the seeing of what's happening, or maybe experiencing it, not seeing it. And they want to know, how are they going to be led out of that turbulence? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you 4 strategies to dealing with turbulence in a real-time basis. And the first one, again, these are all super simplistic, but they're very effective. And they're very effective in the sense that we have seen all of these play out. And I say we, I'm meaning my consultant partners and I have seen this play out in dozens and dozens and dozens of companies. Thousands of people have been impacted by these kind of strategies. The first one, very simply, is this: you must manage the narrative. And when I say manage the narrative, I want to give you an example. One of our client companies has an owner that is somewhat of an absentee owner, done a great job building a business that's fairly automated. He's got a lot of really good people in place that manage the company. And his daughter had gone on to college out of state, had finished her college degree in marketing, and was coming back to live in the state in the same city where his business was located. And what happened was the narrative got started that the daughter, who was a ripe 22 years of age, was coming back to take over for her dad in the company. Now, this is a company of about 120 people. It's not, a massive company, but it's big enough that that narrative began to spread through various communities and departments until it was alive and thriving that Danielle was coming back to, quote unquote, run the company at 22 with a marketing degree. And this is a telecom connectivity type company. So here's what came up in the midst of that. And I'll circle back to what happened on the end. But what I realized in doing some research, talking to people within the company, what was happening was the stories, the folklore, started gaining traction. And there's a book by Yuval Harari called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. It is an amazing book. It's well worth the read, if nothing else, to give you a sense of how we function as humans and how especially narrative has taken hold in our society, in our civilizations. And here's what Harari says in the book: that human beings as a species are very unique in the sense that what makes us different than other species is that our stories, our folklore actually dictate our experience. So as an example, your holidays coming up, however you experience them, right? If you have traditions, the white elephant party comes to mind. My family's done a white elephant party since the time I was 5 years old. And we do it every single year and we have a great time doing it. I meet people outside of my family who go, that's stupid. Why would you do white elephant parties? I don't know, because the narrative in our family is they're a blast and we've always had fun with them. And because that narrative and that folklore started to live on, we were creating this fun involvement in it. So here's what I mean by narrative. There is narrative happening within the walls of your company right now. And the narrative are things like, don't work with Ben, he's a jerk. That's a narrative. There is a narrative that says, well, don't send emails to IT, they'll never respond. That's a narrative that people have created and the folklore has generated more and more. There is a narrative out there around what the future might be. As an example, someone heard some utterance of there being right sizing happening in 2023. And all of a sudden that narrative catches fire, takes wind, and moves on through the entire company. So these narratives are going to be really, really critical in 2023 as turbulence occurs. And the reason that they're really critical to manage is in the absence of information, people will fill in the gap with their own narrative. Now, this happens in families, this happens in companies, this happens in friendships and marriages. In the absence of information, people will fill in the gap with their own narrative. I want to go back to the client company example that I gave earlier. So Danielle's coming back. She's unofficially taking over the company, which was ridiculous. Danielle was coming back to be a social media director, if you will, for a small startup firm. She was basically going to run their Instagram feed, had nothing to do with the father's company. And where the narrative actually was exposed was one of this client's top VPs started going around to the folks within the company, and he was asking a really pertinent question. And the question was this: what do you wonder about? Now, I think this question is worth writing down, because what do you wonder about is the beginning of narratives. Some might call it gossip in an office. What do you wonder about? Somebody's gonna say, well, I wonder if there are gonna be layoffs. I wonder if Bill's gonna get the promotion or Jane's gonna get that new territory that I've been wanting. I wonder about things like that. And when people wonder about it and are able to wonder about it out loud, then you can begin to set the context around the narrative, right? And this is going to be really key again. In turbulent times, the narrative will be filled in, the gaps in the narrative will be filled in by whatever someone wants it to be, right? Whatever supports their own view of that particular experience. So number one, in terms of the 4 turbulent strategies, is manage the narrative. And as a leader, one of the things that you're going to want to do is keep your ear to the rail, be listening to conversations, be listening for subtleties, be listening for questions, and figuring out what's the question behind the question that's creating some narrative that may or may not be true. Because what we don't want to have happen is for some narrative that's not supportive of the organization to spin out of control and then create some level of chaos for us or our team. Okay, that's number one. Turbulent strategy number 2 is this. I'd like you to set the vision time frame in the midst of turbulence. So here's what I mean by that. That flight that we were on, the 10 minutes of really, really rough air, the pilot came on at about 3 minutes in, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that this will go on for about 7 minutes based on what we're seeing on the map. So if you can hang tight for 7 minutes, know that we'll be out of it shortly. What he was doing, and it was very masterful by the pilot, he was setting the vision time frame. And candidly, we don't know how long the turbulence may last, but we can definitely set the vision for our team. And I want to give you another metaphor. If you've ever been to a concert, you know there's really 3 types of lights that are happening at a concert. There's the floodlight, right? The floodlight shows everyone in the audience. There's the spotlight that shows the soloist. And there's the laser beams that shoot out and sometimes cross people's bodies or faces, but they're all very isolated, right? When you set the vision for your team, What we're doing is we're telling our team how far out can we see things. So to put this in context around vision setting and how we do this within the walls of our company, at the beginning of 2020, right, January 2020, everyone was talking about our 2020 vision and how crystal clear our 2020 vision was. It was a terrible, terrible example. But as people were doing this, looking at their 2020 vision, they were saying, this year is going to be amazing. And they were using a floodlight. And the floodlight said, over the course of 2020, here's all the things that are going to happen. Because when we look back, all this greatness and growth had occurred. Little did we know that March of 2020, the wheels would fall off of society. At that point, we became very spotlight focused. In the middle of March 2020, maybe the end of March, depending on the company, what you had to do was say, we are spotlighting the fact that we have to figure out how to work remotely, and we have to get this set up in the next week to 2 weeks. Now we have a very dedicated time frame, a vision of what we're going to occur, what's going to occur and when. And then somewhere in the midst of working remotely, people realized that they could watch Netflix at home and take the dog for a walk as many times as they needed to, and exchange the laundry, move the laundry from washer to dryer, and maybe just clean the kitchen from time to time. And someone let something fall through the cracks. And as a leader, you may have had to call someone up and say, hey, I need you focused on this project for the next 2 days because it has to get done. It's been too long. And that is a laser focused when you're focused on the vision. So know this. One of the things that you're going to have to do with your team is identify what kind of time frame are they comfortable with. Some of the folks on your team, you could give them a floodlight focus and they've got it. That's it. Some of the folks on your team, you have to spotlight for the next 2 months. This is what we're going to work on. And they're good with that. And then the next 2 months, here's the next focus. And then you're going to have some people that you manage the project or the work or the communication with them at a very specific standpoint. Because here's what you'll find out through the forum. In the content around the forum, what we do is we delineate that there are really 4 different kinds of people in terms of the way they communicate, they deal with stress, they plan their work. You have one group that under stress, they will command and take over. So if they know the direction, they can be at the helm, they'll get it done. You have another group that under stress, they will attack and confront. I told you we should have done this, and this is what we should be doing. They'll attack and confront. You have another group that really is looking for consensus. They want everyone to agree, and they'll just acquiesce and go along. And they might need a little more of spotlight or even laser focused attention. And then you have another group that will avoid and withdraw from conflict. That group needs data. They need to know exactly what's going on. And in the midst of uncertainty and doubt, they will avoid those situations or go deep, deep, deep into the data to try and figure out the right answer. And in that case, again, you may need more of a laser focused attention on them. So turbulent strategy number 2, I'm going to put it into this context. You need to know your team, and then you need to know, what does your team need? Do they need floodlight vision? Hey, this year looks like this. Do they need spotlight vision? In Q1, we're focusing on this. Or do they need laser vision? This is our initiative. We need to work on this week. This works. My company, we're working on a software project, and we started out floodlight. We tried to go to spotlight, and we realized this group of developers need laser-like focus, precision, and accuracy on what we're doing this week or today, right? So determine what it is for you, but this is a great turbulence strategy. Strategy number 3, again, simplistic in the way we present it, but this absolutely works. I want you to encourage imagination and encourage innovation. Now, here's what I mean by that. There are some companies that in the midst of being successful, they don't innovate. They're not imaginative. They don't have to be. So in 2018, 2019, the first month of 2020, my friend has a saying that if you run downhill long enough, you'll think you're an athlete. And there were a lot of us that thought we were athletes. We're doing things so well and everything's going swimmingly and we have all this growth. The economy was good. Interest rates were low. People were spending money. And then what happened was things broke and we had to encourage imagination. But in some companies, what's happened is imagination and innovation has actually been tamped down because the messaging is, hey, we want to hear your ideas, But the blind spot for some leaders is they have turned down so many ideas and not really embraced the creativity, that there are some people within your ranks that they just don't care to bring ideas to the table anymore because they aren't heard. They're not valued. They're not going to be put into practice. So what we have to do leading up to 2023 is really celebrate and encourage those who have super imaginative ideas. And this is what I want you to imagine. I'd like you to have imagination sessions into 2023. They can be monthly, they could be weekly, depending on your team and what you're working on. But what you're going to do is not just imagine things. I want you to take bold reimagination to heart in terms of how do we break down what we're currently doing and reimagine it in a different way, a simpler way, almost like you're pulling apart every single block in a piece of Lego construction and reassembling it in a more simplistic manner. Because into 2023, should we experience the turbulence that's predicted, one of the things that I want you to remember is that simplicity rules over complexity. So if there are things that are overly complex, the companies that do it far simpler are going to win. And they will actually pull people over because it feels simpler to do work there. So this bold reimagination requires a couple of things. Number one, you have to create psychological safety for people to innovate. This goes back to not turning down ideas, but celebrating ideas. Have an innovation award for the month. Hold a Shark Tank-like event where you have people come in and present ideas. And I think one of two things will happen. Number one, you'll sort of dredge up all of these really amazing ideas that people have been holding on to because times have been good. And number two, you're going to light the fire under some of the people on your team who have great ideas, but had kind of lost that spark. They didn't think innovation was really all that important. One of our clients from several years ago, the top level position in the company had been a rear admiral in the Navy. And as a rear admiral in the Navy, his leadership philosophy was, if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. And so as a result, all of the ideas got pushed down into the lower levels of the company, and no one was really willing to share anything. Well, he retired. A woman took his place that was very creative, very innovative, saw the challenges in the organization, and immediately created psychological safety for people to come in and share ideas. She then created a small committee of people within departments, and she called it the Speed of Implementation Team. So the Speed of Implementation Team, what they were doing and tasked with was, how are you built for speed on testing? If an idea pops up, how are you going to put it into practice and actually make it happen and then test it and report back? Essentially what she was doing was saying, let's iterate, let's create, let's test, let's iterate, and then let's continue that process. Create an idea, test the idea, iterate the idea to make it better, test it again, iterate again, and then put it into practice. Through this speed of testing and implementation, she did an almost complete culture change of an organization of 4,000 people in roughly 18 months. Now, to some, that may seem like a long time, but 18 months to have complete culture change is somewhat miraculous in an organization that size. They were in turbulent times. They had to change. They used this as a model. So turbulence strategy number 3 is encourage innovation and imagination. Go after the folks who have that imagination, bring them in a room, share it, be inspired by it, celebrate them for it, but make sure you're leveraging imagination and innovation into the next year. All right, 4th strategy is this. And again, this seems very, very simplistic, but I assure you this is probably the most important one. I know it seems somewhat Pollyanna to say this, but I need you to stay positive as a leader. Now, what I mean by this is that, first of all, nothing great has ever been accomplished in a negative environment. So if we are going to accomplish great things into 2023 within the walls of our company, the negativity and the pull to become negative, we have to avoid as leaders and begin to circumvent as leaders. Because what may happen with some of your team is that they're watching Lester Holt and they're, God forbid, getting on Facebook at some time during the day, which is 100% full of FUD. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And when fear, uncertainty, and doubt are present, what happens is people get pulled into a downward negative spiral. And the downward negative spiral comes from saying things like, oh, this figures, or ain't it awful that this is happening, or, well, this quarter is going to suck big time. And when we do that, and we allow that negative downward spiral to occur, we're feeding the narrative that things are bad. When in actuality, what you can do as a leader, and this is the strategy, is make sure that you are setting the context of every conversation. You're setting the direction of the organization or department over which you see. You're setting the pace of the action, and you're setting the attitude of your team. Now, I want to give you a concrete example. Again, I go back to my team and I are working on a piece of fintech, financial technology software that is a behavior modification tool. And in the midst of using this tool, our users are finding there are some glitches, there are some challenges. And my team, from time to time on calls, when we're doing some agile calls on Mondays and Wednesdays, the team would get down. They'd say, oh, we found another bug. We found this. Oh, this isn't working right. And you could almost hear the negativity in how they were sharing it. And at one point I said, hey, we need to reset just a little bit. I want to set context around us finding things wrong. I want us all to know that the word for 2023 is we are, and I use a word that I'm not going to repeat here, but we are unmesswithable, right? That is the goal for 2023, is to become unmesswithable, meaning that nothing that happens to us will really divert us from what we know our goal to be. That's direction. The context of anything that comes up that messes with us is this is good, because this just leads us to the point where no one can mess with us, right? Nothing can mess with our mojo. On a pace structure, where I'm setting the context around that is I'll say, our goal is to work really quickly and diligently on the most important things. Let's delineate what those are right now. And then last but not least, on attitude, is I'll say, hey, if you are ever down, call me and let's get you back on an upward spiral. And the way I do that with teams, and this adds to this strategy that I want you to write down, 2 words, very simply, we all ought to tattoo it on our forearms. You'll hear me say it in the forum again and again and again, but we need to be curious. We need to be curious. And if you want 4 words, I say be curious, not furious, because most people, when something happens, they're prone to get furious right away, as opposed to being curious about what they're experiencing. So when I say be curious, this is the question commonly asked when we experience negative downward spiral emotional chatter from the team. What can be learned from this? Because if everything is a lesson and everything is happening for us, not to us, then everything that's going on could be a lesson, a nugget, a seed of learning somewhere down the road. So for your team, one of the things I want you to get really good at as a leader is when they start going into ain't it awful, this sucks, let them riff for a little bit if they just need to blow off steam, and then turn the conversation to an upward spiral and say, you know, what didn't we know? What could we have done differently to know that information? What do we need to take from this and actually make true next time so that we experience success, not failure, right? How would this meeting go differently if we had an agenda? That could be a simple question, right? So as leaders, one of the things in turbulent times is to stay positive. And the way we stay positive is through creating that upward spiral, not the downward spiral effect for our team. It can be hard for us as leaders to do, but it's absolutely essential. As an example, going back to the flight attendant, if she had ratcheted this down and she said, you better cinch those seatbelts, boys, because it's going to get nasty, that might have taken us in a downward spiral. Well, how long and what's it going to take? And I'm like, are we going to die? Right? Downward spiral. She actually was pretty astute in how she handled it. That's nothing. Let's ask a positive question. So there's 4 strategies. And I want to share one last idea with you. And this speaks to the heart of what this is all about. If you want to write these 4 things down, it's probably a really solid takeaway for 2023, even as a reminder of what's going to happen and how you can deal with it. It is about context over control. So word number 1 is context. In the midst of turbulence in the next year, the context you set for the experience your team has will be critical. Far more important than controlling your team, it's setting the context for how the team operates. Second word is this. It is about autonomy over rules. And why that's important is your teams, they crave the autonomy to make good decisions. So you don't need to set up rules, but you need to set up structures where autonomy is the golden rule, where that they can make decisions, they're supported by you, but there's a framework in how they do that. So autonomy over rules. The third thing that I want you to highlight is speaking up over silence. Your team, one of the things most critical is that they are willing and able to speak up, whether that's one-on-one or in a group setting, but their silence does nothing to support the team. So speaking up is actually a good thing, and you can welcome all that feedback, because anytime someone speaks up, I want you to consider it as feedback. It's not criticism, not complaining, it's just feedback. There's stuff in the system that we need to resolve, and you treat it as feedback. And last but not least, and this is an important one, we want to value simplicity over complexity. This goes back to the imagination strategy, is that how can we imagine things being simpler, being easier, being less complex? That will allow us to operate more optimally when there are turbulent times. So these are all just a few pieces of the puzzle as it relates to the Konik Leaders Forum. And I want to offer up time for any Q&A if you have questions, maybe even particular situations that you're dealing with, or anything around these strategies. Feel free to post that in the Q&A box. Brad's going to comment to me if any come in. And while you are either thinking through questions or want to share some, what I'd like to do is I want to tee up the Konik Leaders Forum. And what we're doing with the forum is this is a 9-month forum where you and peers who are in possibly your industry, possibly not, but all in leadership level positions, will meet on a once a month basis. We do some in person, a number of them are online, and we follow a very specific curriculum that's professionally facilitated. We do roundtable discussions at the end of each of the sessions where we talk about timely and topical issues that our members bring to the table pertaining to professionals in similar roles and titles. And the goal is to have folks who are there in the forum share their experience, share their solutions with the team. And I will tell you, this is one of the most valuable parts of the forum. Consider it to be like the mastermind group or the networking group that I mentioned at the very outset of the webinar. You'll have built-in relationships with these professionals from various industries and backgrounds, and you get exposure to cutting-edge recruiting tools and strategies through the professionals at Konik. And there has been a massive amount of information shared by them about how to keep people happy, how to retain great talent, and the expense that goes into replacing someone. How do we limit that? That really is the goal of the forum. If you are interested in finding out more information, the conversation that you'll have with one of the members at Konik will be certainly just around what are you looking to get out of it? Can you commit to the time that the sessions are scheduled? And if you want more information, go to koniknetwork.com/leadership forum. You can see it there on the screen. I will also put it in the Q&A, or Brad, if you have the opportunity to put it in Q&A for people to see and click on, that would be wonderful. When you go to the,
I think as a panelist, I'm limited to, I don't think I can post Q&A either. So maybe Tom Gettle, our president, can populate that here in the next few minutes. I'll just add a couple things. I've participated in some similar leadership forums throughout the years. They've been critical in not only helping us survive, but thrive. And the peer-to-peer is such a powerful thing, Adam, and we experienced this last year. You finish up, you present the topic, and individuals present challenges they're being faced with, and other individuals from the group inevitably have got great ideas and thoughts that help the individual process and eventually overcome challenges that they're facing. A couple just details. just a correction, just to make sure people understand. Basically, we will run all of the traditional 9 meetings virtually. And then we do have one event where we host a top golf social. Everyone gets a chance to come in and meet everyone in person in a very casual setting. So it's, the other thing too is that with some of the forums I've been involved with, I think that what I'm most excited about is that a lot of times those forums can require a big financial commitment of $500,000 a month. Our forum is going to come in around $1,500 to $2,000 a member. And then the other thing too, in case for those of you that missed at the beginning, what we want to do is, we want to give everyone an opportunity to experience it and decide if it's for them. And so if you look at it, you're intrigued. One of the things that you can do, get signed up, get registered, and know that, come to the first month in January, come to the first leadership forum session. And if you get done with it, you just go, it just wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. No problem. There's no financial obligation. It's risk-free. But if you're like, gosh, that was great, I really got something from there. And then from there, we'll, work out the formal membership. So super excited about it. I know I saw we had one member from last year, Emily, on the webinar today, and in the past we've had many others. We've got great feedback. That's the other thing, is that if you are hesitating or questioning it at all, we'd be happy to give some references from individuals that participated last year to share their experience and what they got out of it. We've got, I think, 1 or 2 testimonials on the site, but just again, thank you everyone for coming out today. I'm not seeing any Q&A posted. Tom did post the link, so that's out there. But I appreciate everyone taking the time, and I know me personally, Adam, I was jotting notes left and right, and the timing's perfect for our annual 2-day offsite meeting coming up here in a couple of weeks. These are great tips and great things to take into potentially a little bit of a scary 2023, but we're optimistic and going to take that positive approach for sure.
I love it, Brad. Yeah, control the narrative. I have no doubt with your group there will be lots of imaginative ideas, possibly even throwing some Legos out on the table. How about that?
Right.
Just to take that example to heart.
Yep. So again, to follow up, we'll send out the recording version of this. Feel free to share it with others if you feel like it might be valuable to them, as well as submitting any questions that you have to myself or Adam. If you submit them to me, I'm ultimately going to turn them over to Adam and get the answer for you. So reach out to either of us if you think of something after the fact. It looks like there's maybe a few things posted here. What's the monthly time commitment again for the meetings? Basically it's once a month, and it's usually the 3rd Thursday. We've had luck with that because that date generally avoids holiday weeks. And last year we ran it from 1 to 3:30. We are looking to cut that up down to maybe 1 to 3. There's a break in there, and then the peer-to-peer at the end. So it's about a 2 to 2.5 hour commitment once a month. Yep, great question.
It is a great question, and thank you for posting it, Tom. One of the things that I want to comment on that too, Brad, the time that we spend together is really intentional. It's there's a piece of content that's shared in every single session, and it's immediately actionable. So what we find is that people will come to the forum, they will come with an issue, and it's weird how it works out, but typically that session answers some burning question that people had about how they're going to handle a problem conversation with a direct report, or how they can manage up the chain, lead up the chain to someone that they're reporting to, how they can implement an initiative. So know that every session, when we go through that material, there'll be takeaways that you can immediately put into action. And we'll have a little bit of homework, as Brad alluded to, not a ton. It's more like thought prompts and questions to ask yourself prior to the next meeting, with a few, have this conversation with this team member nudges along the way. All of them designed to make leading your team that much easier.
Yeah. And the other thing, the final note I'll make is that the biggest thing I think for me is as a leader, it makes you realize that you're not alone, that so many people are going through similar challenges, and it's nice to have the support and feedback from the group. So again, thank you all for coming. and participating in the webinar today. Please investigate the Leadership Forum. We'd love to have you participate. And if there's nothing else, Adam, I think we can wrap up.
Excellent, Brad. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great end to
wonderful
the year.
holidays, everyone.
Yeah, have a wonderful 2023.
Take care.